The South African Human Rights Commission says the Eastern Cape government must publicly account for the appalling state of many schools in the province. The commission is launching its own probe into the death of a 5-year-old who fell into a pit toilet at a school in Bizana. At the same time, sentencing for the racist estate agent, Vicki Momberg, has been postponed to next week. Let's get some reaction on those two stories now, and we're joined by Advocate Andre Gaum for the South African Human Rights Commission. Good evening, Commissioner. Thanks very much for joining us this evening. Any idea how long your investigation into the pit latrine saga is going to take?
Good evening, Vuyo, and thank you for having me. The South African Human Rights Commission has initiated an own initiative investigation into the incident in which Viwe Jali died so tragically in a pit latrine. It is expected that the investigation would be completed as soon as possible in terms of our complaints procedures, and definitely we will deal with this as a priority. In addition to that, the South African Human Rights Commission, yes, for you?
Yes, no, what I was going to ask was what you hope that investigation will achieve, because certainly from a lay person's point of view, we know that the child has died and died in a pit latrine toilet, and there are many of these, not only in the Eastern Cape, but elsewhere in some of the country's rural provinces. Shouldn't we be focusing rather on what needs to happen and happen urgently?
Yes, in this particular instance, we will obviously focus on the specific events and also the reasons why still at this school has to use pit latrines, and this matter of basic infrastructure hasn't been resolved at the Luna Primary School in the Eastern Cape. But in general and broader than that, we have also requested an urgent meeting with the National Minister of Education, Minister Motshekga, to discuss the state of school infrastructure and basic infrastructure. In the meantime, the President Ramaphosa, has also intervened, and he has requested the Minister of Basic Education to do an audit within the next month of unsafe infrastructure across the country. And secondly, then also to come up with a plan, an urgent interim plan to address the situation within 3 months' time. So from the Human Rights Commission side, we will obviously continue to monitor the audit, but also then the outcome of that and the specific plan and its implementation. And we would also like to see a plan with clear deadlines as to how the entire infrastructure matter pertaining to water and sanitation in particular will be solved within a reasonable period of time.
Advocate, with due respect, you seem to be very patient with the Education Department, when in fact the facts are out there. We do know for a fact that the government hasn't met its targets eradicating these kinds of toilets. We know that for a fact. We know that the Education Department hasn't done what it is supposed to do. So to give them more time to still do an audit, in fact, that in itself is a travesty, that 23 years down the line, there hasn't been an audit that establishes with certainty why there are still these kinds of problems. So you, as a Chapter 9 institution, should perhaps be less patient than you seem to be at the moment.
Now, I think all of us and all South Africans are very impatient pertaining to this matter, and it is completely unacceptable that our schools still don't have the basic infrastructure, specifically also pertaining to water and sanitation, and that we still sit with a situation where roughly, well, in 2015 the position was that roughly 30% of schools still either don't have sanitation or are still using pit latrines. This situation needs to change, and that is why we will also regard this as a final opportunity for the Department of Basic Education to deal with the situation. And these urgent interim measures are indeed very necessary to make sure that we eradicate pit latrines completely within a very short period of time, being 3 months, as the President also stated in his intervention.
Do you feel disempowered? Do you feel that as the Human Rights Commission, you aren't able to force the executive and the legislature to do the sorts of things that they are supposed to be doing in these circumstances?
We are determined to make use of the powers that we have. And two of the most important powers is indeed to subpoena government departments, even ministers, to appear before the Commission in particular investigations and to account in public. And we are starting to use that particular power. We have subpoenaed the Social Development Department just the other day pertaining to the SASA-related matters and so on. We also have a very important other power, and that is, in our view, not only to make recommendations, but following the Nkandla judgment pertaining to the public protector, to actually issue directives which are binding, to make binding findings of violations of human rights, and to issue directives. And that is exactly what we are going to do going forward. In some instances it will still be recommendations, but where there are clear findings of violations of human rights, we will follow the route of issuing directives, and government departments will have to take the Commission to court if they don't agree with that, to review such directives.
Let's hope you do indeed do that, Advocate, and sooner rather than later. But before I let you go, would you like to comment on the Vicki Momberg case?
Well, in that matter, the sentencing hasn't been handed down, but I can comment on the fact that the South African Human Rights Commission has also taken Vicki Momberg to the Equality Court, and in that particular matter it also became very clear in the court's judgment that the use of the K word in whatever context is simply unacceptable. And in terms of the sanctions in that matter, Vicki Momberg was indeed ordered to pay 100,000 rands in damages, do 100 days of community service, publish an apology on social media, and so forth. So I think that this sentencing will also confirm the position that all of us should refrain from using derogatory terminology. We as the Human Rights Commission is indeed very concerned that we receive so many complaints relating to racial discrimination, especially also hate speech, and it does appear that violations of the equality rights and hate speech has become a too regular occurrence among too many South Africans. And all of us as South Africans need to respect our constitutional value of unity and in diversity, and not generalize just on the basis that people may be different than ourselves.
Advocate Gaum, thanks very much for talking to us this evening.
And I think in Human Rights Month, that is particularly important as a lesson for all of us. Thank you very much for you. All best.
Thank you very much. He is from the South African Human Rights Commission.